Is Carrot the Eyepatch Pirate of One Piece? You might have noticed that Oda has shown a lot of restraint in adding certain pirate stereotypes to his character designs. We have one hook-hand pirate, Sir Crocodile, one peg-leg pirate, Red Leg Zeph, and to this day, no Eyepatch Pirate. In one of his messages during the celebration of One Piece's 10th anniversary, Oda spoke of the strong association the Eyepatch has with the concept of a pirate in people's minds, and said that a pirate with an eye patch would appear towards the end of his manga. We are now in the final saga, so the appearance of that eye patch pirate is relatively close, and we have a few interesting candidates for their identity. My personal ranking of currently named candidates by their likelihood of getting the eye patch has Carrot at number 3, Luffy at number 2, and Joy Boy at number 1. Why is Joy Boy ahead of Luffy? Because in addition to being the first pirate, most of the reasons you can think of as applying to Luffy probably apply to his Void Century counterpart, but the two big drawbacks against Luffy don't apply to Joy Boy. The first of those drawbacks is the final part of Oda's message. After calling One Piece the story of a pirate who looks like a normal boy, he says, "If there's an image in everyone's head about what a pirate is, then I thought I would draw the process of that boy getting there. But it's not like I dislike eye patches, so in the final scenes of One Piece, there is one pirate who appears with an eye patch. I'm itching to draw this character." You can interpret this statement in a way that actually helps Luffy, with it meaning, I'm gonna draw the process of Luffy becoming the pirate stereotype with an eye patch, but I think it also possibly means something else, especially with the context of the full message. Instead saying, I'm gonna establish Luffy as the image of a pirate in everyone's head, like the eye patch is now. Also, I'll draw someone with an eye patch. The reason I'm inclined to believe the second interpretation is because of the second drawback against Luffy, which is Oda drawing him right here with an eye patch. To me, Oda teasing an eye patch character he's itching to draw in the future, and then drawing Luffy right next to that tease to accompany the message, actually hurts Luffy's chances of being that character. It doesn't quite hurt those chances enough to place him below most other characters, but it certainly does place him below Joy Boy in my mind, because if that drawing is a hint, it'd make far more sense if it was hinting at the eye patch pirate being connected to Luffy. Wait a minute, why is Carrot of all people even in this conversation? Why am I not talking about Blackbeard or something? Well, for one, considering the pirate stereotypes have gone to characters who, like most of the cast, don't otherwise look like pirates, I strongly doubt that the guy in One Piece that looks the most like a pirate as it is would be the one to get the eye patch. And when it comes to Carrot, there are a few interesting things that make the possibility of her getting the eye patch one I cannot dismiss. Carrot is a lookout, and any character with that role automatically stands out in this conversation because another pirate stereotype that happens to be symbiotic with the eye patch is the spyglass. The pirate stereotype is not them looking through goggles as Carrot currently does, but through a spyglass. And if we're looking to check off some stereotypes, then considering Carrot would be the character most frequently highlighted as looking into the distance, one way to eventually align her with the spyglass stereotype would be to have her lose an eye and then maybe wear an eye patch in the process. Oda doesn't stack the cliches when it comes to character design, but once we're past that, you can see how the spyglass and eye patch are compatible enough to make any lookout character a decent candidate for having the eye patch. But the bigger reason her lookout role is relevant here is the people Oda picked for the other stereotypes. Red Leg Zeph specializes in kicking, preserving his hands for the kitchen and hitting Sanji. And this man who became known for his strong kicking ability lost a leg. To a less blatantly obvious degree, Crocodile's power does seem to mostly involve his hands, with him exclusively using them to attack, and that being the body part you want to avoid when fighting up close. And sadly, the power of thirst is now only found within his right hand. With this potentially deliberate irony in mind, I imagine you can see how Oda would choose to have a lookout, for whom you'd assume the eyes to be a big part of the job, as the character that eventually loses an eye and has to wear an eye patch. In addition to being a lookout, Carrot is also the successor to Pedro, a man that lost an eye. Yeah, this is a big one. Mentor lost an eye, the story of the mentor is often reflected in the student. Could student also lose an eye? You already see this in Luffy and Shanks both having scarred eyes. Pedro's lost eye was actually his first big sacrifice towards the Dawn, one that saved the life he would later give up for the Straw Hat crew. So in addition to the burning that we discussed last time and will discuss more later, Carrot might eventually count one of her eyes among the sacrifices made to get us to the Dawn. There is, after all, a pretty strong correlation between being an important Mink that's all about the Dawn and losing a body part on the way to that fateful day. Another pattern I'd like to mention is found within the Straw Hat crew, and it's one that is possibly unintentional, but if not, basically guarantees something happening with one of Carrot's eyes. If you look at the 4 strongest Straw Hats, the group that I suggested Carrot would join to make 5, they each have some kind of scarred and or hidden eye. This is, accidentally or not, specific to this group of strongest fighters and doesn't apply to the other crew members. If this is intentional, then Carrot's place in this pattern becomes clear if you focus on the underlings. It is most definitely intentional for Zoro and Sanji, the right and left hand men, to each show opposite eyes. That is made more obvious by the fact that the eye Sanji covered changed after the time skip, allowing him to show his left eye while Zoro showed his right. The question is if this would extend to Jinbe and Carrot. One small potential sign to the answer being yes is the cover of chapter 1105. Does this illustration hint at Carrot losing an eye? If I had never thought about the topic, I would say, no, of course not. Are you stupid? But I have, and instead I say, maybe. And that's because of the 3 carrots on this image. Unlike Zeph, I'm no expert, but I'm pretty sure what's going on here isn't natural knife placement when cooking. Maybe it is, but it looked weird to me, and it might have looked weird to you too. Perhaps you even saw this and thought, a knife in a carrot? Wait, is Carrot gonna die? To which I say, no. I mean, yes, she will, but that's not my takeaway here, which is instead 2 carrots, 2 eyes, 1 knife in Carrot, 1 eye closed. The question to ask is, will someone stick a knife in Carrot's eye? It's actually hard to imagine what it would take for someone's eye to be damaged enough for an eye patch in this manga, because Shanks' scars are pretty deep and his eye turned out just fine. It's also hard to imagine a narratively meaningful stabbing to begin with because absolutely no one is dying from that in One Piece. So it really seems like one of the only ways for someone to wear an eye patch would be a character being stabbed in the eye. And again, because Carrot is a lookout, it's easy to picture that happening to her because if an enemy lookout is bothering you, the first thing you try to disable if given the chance would be their vision. Even if that thought process of deliberate targeting doesn't happen in universe, taking away one of your lookout's eyes is a sensible option to take as an author when giving that character a challenge to overcome. And look at the eye that's closed, which is her right eye. You know what would happen if Carrot's right eye was injured? It would mirror Luffy's scar under his left eye, Jinbe's scar across his left eye, and Pedro's lost left eye as well. 3 birds, 1 big knife. Which is why when I first thought of this topic, I figured that the eye Carrot would lose would be her right eye, and this cover certainly doesn't help me forget about this idea. If Carrot does end up getting an eye patch, one fun and seemingly random thing I'd see as a hint in hindsight would be the One Piece Dragon Ball crossover manga, Cross Epoch. Like with the comment from Oda mentioned at the start, this manga was done around the time of One Piece's 10th anniversary, and I think it is the only One Piece manga in which we see a character with an eye patch, that being Vegeta from Dragon Ball. I see him with that eye patch and I ask, who did that? Because if it's Oda, then this is something that can't be dismissed. Of course, it's very possibly not Oda, because we know that Toriyama drew his own characters when it came time to finish the chapter, but we also know that Oda did most of the work for this collaboration. I just wonder if that extends to the character design of the Dragon Ball characters and Toriyama then drew them in his signature style, or if Toriyama did the designs for his cast himself and Oda had no input whatsoever on their appearances, or if the answer is somewhere in the middle. I'm curious because this manga was very clearly drawn with an eye towards the future of One Piece, which we see in its ending, where the Straw Hat crew and Z Fighters meet up with Shenron for a tea party in fake Whole Cake Island. I find it very unlikely that Oda drew this manga about Dragon Ball, Whole Cake Island, and by extension Alice in Wonderland, and didn't think of Carrot once. He definitely did think of her at some point. I just want to know if that maybe happened at the same time as Vegeta got an eye patch, because if Oda is responsible in some way for that eye patch, then Vegeta would be a hint to the Eyepatch Pirate. And while Carrot is obviously more closely connected to Kakarot, as the vegetable king of the sky-dwelling half-animal species that transforms under the full moon, she is also pretty easy to connect to the Sky Pirate Prince of all Saiyans, Vegeta. I think the idea of Carrot becoming the Eyepatch Pirate is one worth keeping an eye on. I don't predict she will get the eye patch because I don't actively expect it, I just think it's a reasonable possibility. And that brings me to the framing of this video about leftover Carrot topics from the last one, which ideally you should watch before this, so when you find the time, please go watch that if you haven't. When I recapped my predictions at the end of the last video, you might have noticed that I didn't say, Carrot is gonna be this cool thing and that other cool thing, and also she will specifically be called Miss Princess after playing James Bond with Sanji, because that's not something I predict will happen, like I do for Zoro training Carrot as an example. That's just something that I see as reasonably possible. What's the difference? Well, for the purpose of these two videos, I do make a distinction and call a prediction something that I believe will happen and at the very least would be a little surprised to not see happen. And a reasonable possibility is something that shows enough signs of potentially happening, but doesn't quite need to happen for the story to make sense, so I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't happen. While there is enough to make the idea intriguing, there isn't some Mr. Prince and Miss Princess shaped hole in the story of Carrot. Whereas if Carrot is never shown to keep training after her mentor literally told her to, and after losing a big fight, her story simply won't make sense, especially not in a battle manga. And the obvious person to train with is Zoro, so one is a prediction and the other is a reasonable possibility. And the latter is what this video will mostly focus on. I wanted the first video to paint a big picture of Carrot's place in Oda's mind and of her future in the manga that goes beyond the basics of why she'd reunite with the crew and into the reasons why I believe One Piece is specifically written in a way to give Carrot a big role in the ending, so I focused on predictions, while also throwing in some possibilities if they contributed well enough to the structure of the theories, like addressing the wings of the Pirate King together. This time, I will mostly discuss some possibilities about Carrot's future that I find interesting enough to keep in mind and fun enough to share with you. That said, I do owe you one more prediction based on something I quickly mentioned last time, so let's begin there. I will be very surprised if Carrot does not have amnesia. It's taken for granted that Carrot has no particularly important past and has lived a simple, peaceful life on the Phantom Island of Zou until Jack's attack and the arrival of the Straw Hats, and it's only natural because Carrot herself tells us that she has never spent the night away from Zou, and she doesn't seem to know how seafaring works. But there are two problems with this assumption. The first one is pretty simple and ironically becomes clear the moment Carrot boards the Sunny. She does not have parents on Zou. They are never shown or mentioned. Suddenly, the assumption of a peaceful life on peaceful Zou for this child becomes weird, because if Zou is so peaceful, then nothing could have happened to those parents she doesn't have on Zou, because nothing happened until Jack attacked. We know that in the end, the injured and poisoned minks were treated by the Straw Hats. We also know what Carrot looks like when someone important to her has just been killed, and it's not like this. Nothing happened to her parents on Zou because they don't exist. So unless Carrot is some kind of plant baby born from the whale tree, we are left with two scenarios. Either Carrot was born on Zou to parents who left the country, or Carrot was born outside of Zou and entered the country later. The reason I believe that Carrot has amnesia is that while Carrot has told us she has never left Zou, Oda has instead told us that Carrot was not on Zou until at least the age of 10. The answer lies in the single flashback we got of Carrot before the main story, a flashback that has only gotten more suspicious as we learn about the Minks. In chapter 878 and episode 850, we see Carrot being trained by the leader of the Musketeers, Sharlayan, and then by the leader of the Guardians, Pedro. This isn't just interesting because of what I suggested last time, but also because this scene doesn't take place long before Carrot meets the Straw Hats. In the anime's expanded version of the scene, she pretty clearly looks not much younger than she does now. But even if you don't want to put stock into her anime design, chronologically, this scene could have only happened after Carrot turned 10 years old. Carrot is currently 15, and Pedro was already a pirate 15 years ago when Carrot was born, and didn't return to Zoe until his failed attempt to steal Big Mom's poneglyph, which was 5 years before the story. This scene of course takes place after his return, which is why he only has one eye. Based on the anime, Carrot is likely a teenager here. In fact, what makes the most sense is that she's unknowingly preparing for her future adventure during the period of the time skip, just like the Straw Hats. But even if we put aside the anime, the youngest she could possibly be here is 10 years old. Why is that a problem? Because this is the moment Carrot joins the Musketeers. That's why she doesn't have a cape, and why the basics of whether she can even wield a sword in the first place are being tested. And yet, we know that Pedro was a guardian at age 8, and Wanda was a musketeer at age 4. In fact, we see them with their capes pretty early on in their lives, in the exact same chapter as we see an older Carrot without one. This got more suspicious after the Oden flashback showed us both Inu and Neko with their capes at age 7. With every flashback to an important Mink in their youth, Carrot's tiny flashback sets her more and more apart. If Carrot grew up on Zoe, why was she not a caped fighter earlier like the others? There's no real explanation for it. Minks are natural-born fighters, so there's no reason for Carrot to wait longer than the others to start training, and there's no reason to assume Carrot herself would choose to wait before training. Anecdotally, many of the works of fiction that influenced the creation of Carrot also point to this. As we hopefully all know by now, Carrot is Goku, or Kakarot, warrior race, orange, glutton, Ozaru, Super Saiyan 3 and all that. Cool trivia about that last one, the title Toei gave to the episode debuting Sulong is an homage to the title of the episode that debuted Ozaru 32 years prior. Isn't that fun? Well, not as fun as those terrible things Kakarot was sent to Earth to do before hitting his head, getting amnesia, and becoming a good guy. Carrot is also Alice in Wonderland, and if the events of that story are fake, then the life Carrot thinks she has led turning out to be fake would align with that as well. And we can't forget about the manga world's slightly more famous, sometimes blonde, sometimes white-haired transforming moon rabbit, Tsukino Usagi from Sailor Moon, who also, coincidentally, begins her story with amnesia. And for what it's worth, Usagi's lost memories also happen to point in the direction of that thing I discussed in the last video. But the most relevant source of inspiration here is the one that actually influenced the one flashback we see. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas obviously inspired the Musketeers in Zoe, and Usagoku Alice herself is inspired by the main character of that book, the Fourth Musketeer. At the start of his story, the young new musketeer recruit, D'Artagnan, comes to Paris to join the team and has to spar with one of the titular Three Musketeers upon his arrival, while the other two in the trio watched, until they were interrupted by a member of a separate squad. And that is exactly what Oda replicated with the one brief flashback of Carrot, which again points to Carrot not coming from Zoe. And by the way, another one of Dumas' books, The Man in the Iron Mask, influenced another flashback in the Whole Cake Island arc. So, if Carrot didn't grow up on Zoe but says she has never been outside of Zoe, and we know her not to be a liar, then Carrot has amnesia, plain and simple. This girl simply didn't grow up like the other Minks who we know to have grown up on Zoe. We either have a case of amnesia or incoherent world building. And considering Oda has played with the idea of the rabbit symbolizing the forgotten, considering he's already made memory an important aspect of the design of the Minks, and most importantly, considering this is the guy who loves world building and amnesia so much that he built his world to have amnesia, I'm gonna err on the side of Carrot having amnesia. And if she does, then Carrot likely has a tragic childhood that caused it. Amnesia simply happens to be the way Oda left room for her past to be explored later, as part of an arc that actually focuses on her and sees her join the crew officially. Nami tagged along after Orange Town and does not get her flashback until Arlong Park. Robin tagged along after Alabasta and does not get her flashback until Water 7. This is simply how it works for female Straw Hats, because crew members get their flashbacks before joining officially, but female Straw Hats don't join officially until after they start sailing with Luffy, so Oda leaves room for their tragic past to be shown later. And I hope you can see how he has done just that for Carrot. I can't tell you what that past is, just that you should expect her to have one that goes beyond living an uneventful life on Zoan. I will be very surprised if Carrot does not have amnesia. If you're curious about what her hidden past might be, I recommend this video by Gabiru D. I don't think it quite does the best job of explaining the simplest reasons why Carrot can't be from Zoan, which is part of why I still did this topic, but it does take the idea of amnesia hiding a dark past and run with it in a fascinating direction. If you've somehow found this video but not Gabiru's before, then I highly recommend watching it. When I brought up the idea of Carrot being the Eyepatch Pirate, you might have found it weird in part because taking away a lookout's eyes seems weird. As we've now established, that's actually an ironic twist that Oda might like, but I'd also like to bring this moment from Whole Cake Island to your attention. In it, we see that Carrot is not just able to notice Randolph, the rabbit homie, without seeing him, she can also identify that Randolph can't make Electro. I have two takeaways from this scene. Takeaway number one, in addition to her good vision and good hearing, I think Carrot can probably read electromagnetic waves like Eneru can. That is what makes the most sense to me for how she'd identify at a distance that Randolph can't make Electro, because it's easy to imagine that the waves that come from people who can manipulate electricity, like the Minks, are different from those coming from people who can't, and I don't really know how this moment would work otherwise. So Carrot's skill set as a lookout may go far beyond her just having good vision and hearing, and in fact, I think it's quite likely that if she gets observation haki, and it's of a strength and a design that fits her role, then in contrast to Luffy's future sight, or Usopp's sniper scope, Carrot would probably have wide-range radar-type observation, like Eneru. These things all together would be the cartoon logic that theoretically allows a one-eyed pirate to be a great lookout. Takeaway number two is that Mihawk is very possibly a Mink. So in true One Piece fashion, we'll take a bit of a halfway point detour because when looking closely enough at the Minks to take the notes that eventually turned into these videos, I didn't just come to the conclusion that Carrot very likely didn't come from Zoan, or that the Minks in general probably don't come from some living creature that hasn't always existed, or all of those other things we discussed last time. I also started suspecting that Dracula Mihawk is a furless monkey Mink. Through the interaction with Randolph, Oda establishes that the condition for being a Mink isn't looking like an animal, and that something to look out for is the ability to create Electro. I find that fascinating because this fictional world now allows Oda to have a reveal that someone we'd assume to be human from their appearance was actually a Mink, which could be revealed either through them using Electro or going Sulong. And one big sign that Oda is interested in the idea and deliberately left room for such a reveal to happen is the Oops All Hybrids family that makes up the Big Mom Pirates. The easiest way to have a furless monkey Mink would of course be to have a character be a hybrid, half human and half monkey Mink, which is why I find it curious that in the arc that showed us hybrids of so many different races, in the land that aims to welcome all the different races, and in which we clearly see Minks, we did not get a single Mink hybrid. There is really no logical reason to think Big Mom doesn't have a Mink child. She almost certainly does. And if the sole intent behind not showing them was to not have Sulong on the enemy side during the full moon, then that child could have simply been shown among the younger ones, but instead, we don't see them at all. Which leads me to believe that for now, Oda may not want to show us any confirmed Mink hybrid for some reason, and the likeliest person to be that reason is Mihawk. Mihawk is a musketeer. He is based on the same type of historical swordsman as half of the Minks. Yakuza on one side, musketeers on the other, and Mihawk is like the latter group. Him being a musketeer gets more interesting when you consider the ties between Zoan, Wano, and swordsmanship. Zoan and Wano are sibling countries, and much like many of the Minks are based on famous swordsmen of the West that are popular in fiction, many from Wano are based on famous swordsmen of the East, the samurai. I'm pretty sure Zoan and Wano are the only countries in One Piece where many inhabitants are so explicitly tied to a specific class of famous swords users from history, and it's within these classes of swordsmanship that we find the two greatest swordsmen in One Piece and the only two possessors of black blades, Ryuma the samurai from Wano, and Mihawk the musketeer with an unknown background. You can see how it would line up pretty well if his background was connected to the Minks and Zoe in some way, especially considering the next greatest swordsman and Black Blade haver will also be a descendant of Wano and Samurai. Like Ryuma and Zoro, Mihawk's connection to Shanks might also end up being relevant here. From the last video, it should be pretty clear that I think Minks and Carrot are going to be the most direct contrast to Celestial Dragons and Imu, what with them being the ones who tell us about the dawn and all that. I believe Minks and Celestial Dragons to be particularly fated enemies, and if I'm on the right track, then Mihawk having a friendly rivalry with Shanks, a cheery and good-natured Celestial Dragon who lives away from the generally hateful Celestial Dragons, would make it fitting for Mihawk to be an introverted and reserved Mink who lives away from the generally loving and easygoing Minks. If Mihawk is a Mink, then he'd most likely be a furless monkey Mink, which would be funny because Mihawk is the boss of an island of strange animals known as humandrills, monkeys that take on human traits. And if Zoro had to defeat these monkey-human hybrids to fight the world's strongest swordsman, maybe that's because our Monkey King here is a hybrid himself. After all, it would be quite fitting for Zoro to be the character getting the explanation about humans being figurative monkey minks without fur, only for his fated opponent to end up being a literal version of what Wanda discussed with him. I don't believe nor predict Mihawk to be a Mink. He doesn't need to be one for his red-ringed eyes or musketeer design or general character to make sense. If this manga ends with us somehow not knowing more about Mihawk's background than we do now, then I will find that boring, but not for Mink-related reasons. That said, I do believe he is the most likely character to secretly be a Mink among the living characters we'd assume to be humans, if that's an idea Oda has been interested in. And with Oda establishing that one could theoretically be a Mink without looking like an animal, in the arc that happens to feature hybrids of all the races Big Mom has on her territory except the Minks, it's hard for me to dismiss this idea. I'll admit it's also hard to dismiss because the Sulong form of a half-Mink would probably either look like Super Saiyan 2 or Super Saiyan 4, and I find the image of a white-furred Super Saiyan 4 Mihawk so very cool that it has consumed my mind for years now. Maybe his teeth would even get sharper to play into his vampire motif, and that vampire thing would also easily tie into Minks biting people all the time. One potential development I have in mind that's related to this is the idea from the last video of Zoro training Carrot. If that happens, then the chances of Mihawk being a Mink would immediately skyrocket. Firstly because if Zoro ends up training a clairvoyant bird musketeer after being trained by a clairvoyant bird musketeer himself, then it wouldn't be surprising for those two musketeers to end up being connected. But more importantly, Zoro and Carrot training together works for both of them character-wise, but in terms of combat, it of course only benefits Carrot, who would be the one learning under him. But if Mihawk is a Mink, then he would have the same abilities as Carrot, so Zoro training her would help prepare him for his fight with Mihawk, especially if the training happens after Carrot fully unlocks her Sulong form. Because if Mihawk is a Mink, then the strongest swordsman would absolutely not need to wait for the full moon to use his true power when necessary. So if Zoro trains Carrot, then Mihawk will look even more suspicious. Back to Carrot, another question I have is whether this bird is supposed to be a singer, because Carrot is meant to help bring the dawn, and the dawn of the world is to the world what the light of Shandora was to Shandora, but the light was neither light nor sight, it was a sound, the song of the island. That's why the music motif is so prominent in Skypiea, appearing in so many of the chapter titles, and presenting the event of the arc like one big song. So it's very interesting that the Moon Princess is named through a song. And if Carrot is the Moon Princess meant to play a big part in bringing the dawn to the world, then I wonder if that might at some point involve singing a song. From the very beginning, the Sun God really wanted a musician on his crew, so it's fair to consider that music would eventually play a big part in Luffy realizing his purpose. Bink's sake, which likely represents the previous Sun God, has already contributed to the dawn by inspiring people to sail the seas and seek their freedom. And in addition to sounding the drums of liberation, on Skypiea Luffy was shown to enjoy singing, so with him being a mirror to Carrot, I wonder if their shared interest in drawing extends to the creative arts in general. Like Skypiea, the dreamland of Whole Cake Island, the setting of Carrot's first big arc, also has a big theme of music and singing in it, and it's there that Carrot goes Sulong for the first time, inspiring this cover of Volume 88 that brings me to the other big instance of the One Piece world of dreams being strongly associated with music, film Red. As said at the end of the last video, I think Uta is in large part meant to foreshadow ideas connected to Carrot, the Dawn, and the Moon, and I had a slight feeling of that soon after the movie was announced, because One Piece film Red was initially teased with this image of a rabbit girl singing with her face tilted towards the sky, with an almighty voice and fiery red locks. This promo visual felt familiar to me, and eventually brought to mind Carrot, because the first time Oda depicted one such image is in the cover of Volume 88. As we see her shout with her face tilted to the sky, the image this evokes to me is one of a singer. I suspect the connection between Uta and Carrot extends to Uta's singing ability and her music aiming to bring about the new era, because the Moon Princess is named through a song that was played in celebration of the dawn coming to Wano, a song that happens to currently be wordless, which I do find kind of interesting. Maybe it was never meant to have any lyrics. Maybe Toki died before she could teach her daughter the lyrics, and so now those await to be discovered on a poneglyph somewhere. Or maybe even some completely new lyrics would be written for the song, and for the new princess to sing herself. Per the last video, the Moon Princess is the light side of the moon, and because Shandora means moon, the light of Shandora isn't just a reference to the dawn, it's also the light of the moon, the very same light that calls to the Minks. The sacred land will sing once more, and if the light is a song and the sacred land was named after the moon, it might be because the dawn of the world will be ushered in not only by the drums of liberation, but also by the song of the moon, its princess, and her wonderland of a world. But before she can sing, she needs to be brought back, so let's talk about how Carrot's death will accomplish just that. In the previous video, I described why it's very likely that Carrot will not just die, but do so in a way that involves fire. The burning sacrifices of Mentor and Mirror point in one clear direction, that of Carrot herself eventually entering the cooking pot. The melting snow marks the coming dawn, and if it's by fire that Rabbit becomes Moon Rabbit, then it's by fire that Carrot will become Moon Princess. Today, I want to share with you my best guess on the specifics of the event, the timing and location, the exact mechanics of death and rebirth, as well as the aftermath. Based on everything in One Piece up until the Egghead arc, this is how I picture the Carrot being cooked. On Little Garden, Luffy and Usopp developed a fascination with giants and their combat philosophy, enamored with the idea that a fight could go on for a full century for no other reason than a warrior's honor. That passion was specific to them, contrasted with the amicable respect that the rest of the crew had for Dory and Broggy. In the lead up to the highly anticipated adventure on the home of their beloved giants, Luffy ended up becoming a god from Elbaf legend, while Usopp was declared a god as he was held in the sky by the hands of a giant. And I think Carrot's own moment of becoming one of the so-called gods of the One Piece world will most likely happen on Elbaf itself. The island of Elbaf gets its name from the warrior god revered by its inhabitants, and the idea of divinity pops up a lot when it comes to the land of warriors. So I find it interesting that Carrot has not only shown an interest in giants, but was specifically told by Pedro to become a mighty warrior. I suspect that phrasing is very deliberate, because through Kiku, it's hinted that the snow rabbit would melt before the dawn, and the giants just so happened to celebrate the return of the sun through an end of winter festival. So Oda connects the idea of snow and dawn to Elbaf as well, and the same is true of the moon, because the only lunar city we know of, Birka, gets its name from the real-life Viking city and trading center. The Vikings are of course a big inspiration for the One Piece giants, so I think their connection to the moon will likely be expressed through Elbaf being the setting of the Moon Princess's return, somewhat like the land of the rising sun for the sun god. The giants believe that a warrior is defined by their death. After losing her way once, it is likely on Elbaf that Carrot will follow in her mentor's footsteps and display the heart of a mighty warrior by dying an honorable death. So her killer would be whoever the villain of the Elbaf arc is. One good candidate is Big Mom, who is already deeply tied to Elbaf and told us she wasn't gonna die from the events of Wano. Big Mom is based on the villain of the story whose protagonist inspired Carrot, so maybe Oda would eventually express their connection in a more direct way than he has so far, with Carrot mostly dealing with underlings of Big Mom. With her fire homie Prometheus and potential magma homie in the aftermath of Wano, she'd have no trouble doing the cooking, and Big Mom being alive in the first place would mean she'd have survived extreme heat herself, making her a fitting person to put Carrot to the test. The god of disaster has even started a fire in Elbaf already, during a past winter solstice, so maybe she'd do it again. Whoever starts the fire, Carrot would then jump into it because doing so would help Luffy and the crew in some way. Considering that festival on Elbaf involves snow, fasting, and the sun god, considering the moon rabbit hopped into a fire to help a starving man that was actually a god, and considering Oda keeps tying Luffy's hunger to his sun god form, one possible context that I can see for this event is Carrot hopping into the fire to help a starving Luffy that can't go into Gear 5. I think this is worth keeping in mind, but like the villain who starts the fire, this is highly variable, so it could go some other way. Ultimately, all we can safely say for now is that fire will happen, Carrot will hop into fire, and Carrot will die, because fire bad and fire kill people. Then what? Obviously she can't actually die because we have the whole Dawn of the World business to deal with, so what happens to Carrot when she dies? The same thing that happens to everyone. Her memories flash before her eyes. I suspect Carrot's death is a big reason why Oda made her have amnesia. It's very likely in this moment that we would see Carrot's flashback, at the same time as the repressed memories of her childhood would resurface due to her approaching death. This event is why I think Carrot will likely officially join the crew after Elbaf, and crew members get their flashback before officially joining, so this would be the time to do it. But as far as not dying goes, what's more important is that Carrot's death is also likely a big reason why the Sulong transformation has been tied to subconscious memories. Memories that the Minks somehow have from birth, along with the ability to fight, and that are likely inherited from a specific ancestor as a reference to reincarnation. At death's door, Carrot would possibly not just see her personal repressed memories, but also the inherited memories that activate Sulong, the ones that normally resurface during the full moon. This happening to Carrot on the brink of death would be part of what makes her special among the Minks as the Moon Princess. Just as the previous rulers of Zou could not die before bringing the dawn to Wano, Carrot cannot die before bringing the dawn to the world. So the miracle happens, and after seeing her full past, Carrot would begin to go Sulong right as she's about to die. Death completes a person, and Carrot's death would give us a complete picture of her character and give her complete freedom in reaching her true form. And the Sulong form is key here, because the dying Carrot would then use the stronger Electro of Sulong to restart her heart, just like the false god Eneru did all those years ago. Manipulating your heartbeat using electricity is not a foreign concept in One Piece, and one of the many things that I suspect Eneru foreshadows about Carrot and the Minks is the revival method of the true King of the Moon. Her moon transformation saving her life by restarting her heart also mirrors what happened with Luffy in Wano. But once she comes back to life, she of course needs a method of surviving the fire that initially killed her. For that, I propose thermoelectric cooling, or at least a fictional ability inspired by it, one using the powered up Electro of Sulong on its own, or maybe a combination of Electro and Haki. Either way, thermoelectric cooling. And no, I don't pull these fancy words out of nowhere to sound smart, I'm pulling them from the Egghead arc of One Piece, in which Vegapunk offhandedly told Vegapunk, "Hey, if the coffee's too hot, we could use a thermoelectric effect to take its heat and convert it into energy." Whatever Vegapunk was gonna say before this assumedly unimportant line was cut off, that process would of course also cool the coffee down. Now, I won't bore you with the technical details of this complicated concept that I definitely took the time to understand before mentioning, but basically, you can use a change in temperature to create electricity, and you can use electricity to create a change in temperature, hence thermoelectric. The latter is what I'm proposing Carrot would do, because however this works in real life, Oda is clearly familiar with it. So based on the liberties he's taken with many of his fictional powers, I can easily imagine him taking this real-life concept of thermoelectric cooling and using it as the basis for Carrot's ability to survive the fire. He rooted Eneru's revival in a real-life application of electricity, and I suspect he would do the same for Carrot as well. This would turn Carrot's long-standing weakness to heat into a strong resistance or perhaps even an immunity, using the power of her true form and making Sulong Carrot one truly fit to stand beside the sun. Like the heartbeat manipulation, it would also mirror Luffy developing a resistance to poison after a near-death experience involving severe poisoning, because miracles. Funnily enough, Carrot's weakness to heat as a mink was highlighted in the same chapter as Luffy's newfound resistance to poison. So, that's how Carrot comes back to life. Fire, death, memories, Sulong, Electro, rebirth, Electro, survival. Moon Princess, which I suspect will be confirmed to us by the Sea Kings, who are very possibly heading to Elbaf. In the last video, I explained why Carrot, or the rabbit-eared Moon Princess, is the most likely candidate to be the counterpart to the rabbit-eared mermaid princess, Shirahoshi, and the second ruler that the Sea Kings have for some reason. And with a giant ship in need of repairs, the Sea Kings left the Ryugu Kingdom to seemingly get the help of a certain group. It's hard to think of giant animals and giant ships in need of shipbuilding wood for repairs without thinking of Elbaf and the Atom Tree, making its inhabitants a logical candidate for being the group that the Sea Kings were discussing. So it's interesting that their second ruler could seemingly re-emerge on Elbaf, and I think they will likely be in attendance for her return, but I suspect they won't be alone. After releasing the last video, I was able to watch certain One Piece videos I had put off while working on mine. One of those was this video by Sawyer7Mage, which then brought me to this video on the ancient weapon by the Last Zoan, and this video is fantastic. It's one of the best One Piece videos I've seen, and one you should absolutely watch if you haven't. It makes the very compelling suggestion that all three ancient weapons are comprised of three parts: a person, an animal reliant on that person, and a ship reliant on the animal. This is a natural fit with the ancient weapon we know the most about, Poseidon, with Shirahoshi, the Sea Kings, and the Noah lining up smoothly with the idea. And once you understand how those work, you can easily understand how Momonosuke, Zunisha, and the ship we currently think of as Pluton would align with this as well. The video then makes the convincing case that Uranus would involve a royal from Elbaf, likely Prince Loki, along with an animal and a ship. I won't tell you any more because this is a brilliant video you should go watch yourself if you haven't, and once you have, you should watch this follow-up about a potential fourth ancient weapon because it is very good as well. All I need to bring up from those is that the ancient weapons each involve specific people, which is compelling and relevant to what I've discussed here with Carrot. Because it is very curious that after the Fishman Island arc, Oda introduced the idea of the Sea Kings having not one, but two rulers, despite Shirahoshi clearly being the one that's called Poseidon, and the Sea Kings clearly not being aware of Luffy before they saw him. I've also often wondered about the Minks being the only group we know to have been trusted with a road poneglyph while also not having an ancient weapon. So with that in mind, I propose that each ancient weapon is connected to two people, with every beast having one ruler that's specific to them and another overarching king, that being the king of animals, the lion aka Moon Princess. Because it's even easier to connect Carrot to Zunisha than it is with the Sea Kings, since Zunisha has served as Carrot's home for at least a couple years, and she is now the ruler of a country that sits atop Zunisha, a country that is sibling to the home of Zunisha's confirmed ruler, which is itself led by clans that take their names from the moon. In a technical sense, Carrot is already the second ruler of Zunisha, and what I mentioned last time with Oda hiding Carrot during the reactions to Zunisha being attacked may not only hint at her hearing the voice of all things, but also at her having a deeper connection to Zunisha that couldn't yet be revealed. Consider the fact that Zunisha has been going somewhere. Somewhere we don't know, and somewhere that has to be important. With Zunisha carrying a road poneglyph meant to guide Joy Boy Jr. to Laftel, I doubt Zunisha himself is heading to Laftel, and Marie-Joie has never felt right either for similar reasons, so this question has always been somewhat confusing to me. But with the giant fish possibly heading to Elbaf, a giant something, go watch that video, possibly residing in Elbaf, and the general Elbaf area as a whole being home to giant animals, it might be that Zunisha has been walking towards Elbaf this whole time and will be joining us for the grand return of the Moon Princess, just like he didn't fail to hype up his Joy Boy in Wano.
I can hear it, the lion song,
or something like that. And then with Elbaf possibly having the third ancient weapon beast, and giants being connected to the moon through the city of Burka, Carrot being one of the two people to get the lore drop on Prince Loki, in addition to showing us her interest in giants and hinting at her involvement in their big arc, might also lead to the reveal of her being Loki's counterpart in ruling Uranus. That would make this a gathering of all the beasts for the return of their overarching king, with the ancient weapons and their respective rulers on standby. The necessary pieces that Roger was too early to have would at long last be in play and ready for the final war and dawn of the world. All that would remain would be the Straw Hats going to Laftel and uncovering the true history of the world, with Carrot as part of their crew, because it is in dying that Carrot would complete her transformation into crewmate of the Pirate King. That is how I currently picture the death of Carrot and the rebirth of the Moon Princess. Thank you for watching. Until next time, don't get cooked, stay off the hook, and take good care of you. P.S. I'd like to talk about Vegapunk's message and how it might relate to things I've discussed in these two videos. First, I find it pretty funny that the part where he talks of the mysterious kingdom Joyboy was born in is timed with the transition to the current home of the Minks and paired with the iconic done sound effect. The reason I specified that Wano before its arc was the only currently named candidate for the kingdom above the dukedom of Mokomo is that with there being some mysterious advanced kingdom of the past and the Minks likely coming from some kingdom distinct from Zou, the possibility of those two kingdoms being one and the same could not be dismissed. And while it's still not guaranteed, Vegapunk certainly did make it likelier to be true. So maybe Joyboy was born in the kingdom on the moon led by a Mink. Maybe he was even a Mink himself. Though that's also not guaranteed because if Minks were on the moon, then we'd have at least two races there with the furred people and winged people. And with Burka being connected to Vikings and therefore giants, maybe there were also giants and buccaneers. Maybe even humans as well. The moon of the Void Century reflecting the world as it should have been and the world as it will be at the end of One Piece, with many races coexisting in harmony, wouldn't be surprising at all. Another thing I find fun is Carrot being shown right as Vegapunk discusses the impossibly advanced weapons of that era, something we'll definitely see in a new light if she ends up being connected to all three ancient weapons. And then there's the mention of thermoelectric effects that I brought up earlier. But what I most want to highlight is the tease made in chapter 11:17 when the message is interrupted, A in English, Mo in Japanese. With that tease being elevated to both chapter title and cliffhanger, I feel it basically has to be connected to something that's already in the manga. It would be completely and uncharacteristically worthless otherwise, but obviously, we can't simply control F through every mention of Mo in the entire script of One Piece, because that would probably be a waste of time even to a native Japanese speaker. That said, I'm also not satisfied simply trying to make up a dramatic sounding sentence that you could tack Mo onto like an irrelevant accessory. So my mind goes to a type of text that one can more reasonably expect an audience to remember, and therefore seems reasonable to reference in such a situation. A song. Because no theory about the Void Century and One Piece endgame is truly complete without some BS shoved into it. And it just so happens that Pink Sake is an easy way for this tease to have actual meaning today. After talking about the beloved brewed beverage he aims to deliver to the world, Vegapunk begins his message proper by addressing the state of the sea and telling us what he knows of the story that got us here, eventually declaring Joyboy, the first pirate and the sun god of the Void Century, to be its protagonist. He then goes on to end his message by addressing the scattered people of D, and claims that there is within them a something, or mo something. After talking about Binks' beloved brewed beverage and the seafaring pirates that aim to deliver it, the song describes the rise of the sun upon the beating of the drums, the parting of people who will never meet again, and immediately after, claims that the moon will also rise. Te o furu kage ni mo aenai yo, nani wo kuyo kuyo asu mo tsukuyo. The mo that comes up in Vegapunk's message after he addresses the scattered people of D is repeated in back-to-back lyrics of Binks' Sake, when the song addresses the people going their separate ways and the return of the moon. So Vegapunk mentions a brew, the sea, the first pirate, the sun, the scattered people, and mo something, whereas Binks' Sake mentions a brew, the sea, pirates, the sun, mo the separation of people, mo the moon. If I'm on the right track with these videos, then the moon counterpart to the sun god would be important enough for Vegapunk to mention if the poneglyphs he had made him aware of her, but also narratively important enough for Oda to currently hide. And given the structure and topics of the message and the song, one very easy way for mo to have meaning today, to be interesting today, and not be completely worthless as a title and cliffhanger today, would be for the mo in the message to be followed by the same thing as the mo in Binks' Sake, something connected to the moon. Vegapunk talks about the sun person, and it's only natural that the sun and moon would go hand in hand, so I think this is a possibility worth keeping in mind. PPS. Shiki, from Strong World, is known as the Golden Lion and has the power of flight. Shiki has on his Jolly Roger and in the back of his head a ship's wheel that was originally going to be stuck in the head of a certain God Valley bear rabbit, and then ended up in the hands of a certain lion rabbit for the end of her big chapter, which, by the way, in case there was any doubt last time, I think is also deliberately connected to the wheel tattooed on the shoulder of a certain member of God's Guardians. I don't actually know what this wheel would symbolize. Gabiru D makes a very good case for it being a reference to the Buddhist wheel of Dharma, and I'm inclined to believe him based on the many references to Buddhism in One Piece. But I just think it's fun that it pops up in characters with ideas that I suspect are connected to Carrot, so I wanted to share it. More interestingly, the strong world populated by strange animals and winged humans that the lion was in control of was a group of islands in the sky, collectively known by the name of Merveille, and Merveille happens to be the French word for wonder. Alice in Wonderland, Alice au Pays des Merveilles. So the very first One Piece film, and the only One Piece movie to date that was written by Eiichiro Oda, was about a flying lion and has Luffy teaming up with an electricity-producing flying bird to fight for the future of the crew's home in a battle that took place on a Wonderland. I think that's neat.